Hey, Mark. And do we have an LAO handout?
Good afternoon, Judy Hyman from the LAO, and yes, indeed you do. It's coming around just now.
Thank you, Ms. Hyman. Good to see you again.
Thank you. This is a brief overview of the Community College Conference issues. Starting on page 1 of the handout, as you can see, all 3 plans, the governor's, the assembly's, and the Senate's, have significant new community college spending. Under the governor's plan, the community college funding grows from $6.4 billion to $7.2 billion to $7.9 billion for the prior year, current year, and budget year, respectively, significant increases. Both houses adopted the higher LAO revenues and provided an additional $100 million over the 2-year period. And to put this in perspective, under both houses' packages, the 2015-16 budget is $1.4 billion, or 21% higher than the budget you adopted for community colleges last year. In addition, you provided $650 million in current year funds for a total of more than $2.1 billion in higher spending level. On page 2 of the handout, you can see that, as Senator Leno mentioned yesterday at the beginning of conference, the governor and both houses agree on 98% of the spending. For the community colleges, all 3 plans contain nearly $900 million to reduce the mandate backlog, address deferred maintenance, and eliminate deferrals. All 3 provide $500 million for adult education, and a similar amount in community college base apportionment increases to fund a 3% enrollment growth, the statutory COLA, and additional unallocated growth increases above growth in COLA. All 3 provide large augmentations for student support services, including $115 million for student equity plans to further reduce disparities in access and achievement among subgroups of students, $100 million to further enhance student success and support programs, and $15 million to expand institutional effectiveness initiatives which provide technical assistance and professional development to districts. And all 3 provide $75 million to hire additional full-time faculty at the community colleges. So quite a bit of agreement. You do have a number of differences among the plans, however, on page 3. The Assembly adopted the governor's proposal to provide $60 million in one-time grants to improve basic skills instruction. The Senate did not. The Senate provided $50 million in one-time funds for adult education data systems, as you heard on page 3 of the agenda earlier today, and neither the governor nor the Assembly approved that proposal. The Assembly provided about $90 million for several categorical programs, while the Senate provided about $50 million for a different mix of programs, focusing more on COLAs than augmentations. The Senate provided $25 million more than the Assembly and the governor in the budget year toward mandate backlog payments, and the Assembly provided $16.5 million more than the Senate and the governor in current year funds for the same purpose. And finally, the Senate provided $25 million more than the Assembly and governor to fund deferred maintenance and equipment. Page 4 of the handout lists the detailed issues in conference. As you can see, both houses spend approximately the same total amounts, but have some different priorities within these totals, as I've discussed. That concludes the overview. Happy to answer any questions.
So thank you for pointing out the 2%, and I think the math here is that in round numbers, we're investing approximately $8 billion in community colleges, and the difference is in the neighborhood of around a half. See, 10% would be $400 million, 5%. Well, in community colleges, a little higher than 2%. But overall, too. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Hyman. So our first item is page 21 regarding operating costs. And the governor had a proposal.
This was one of our proposals in the community colleges. We're able to, with the significant increase in the Prop 98 guarantee and the money going to community colleges, we've taken this opportunity to make some targeted one-time investments, but also to help shore up some of the ongoing base resources. And this is one where we provided $125 million to really reflect the increased costs that school districts are facing across the board. So it's a flexible pot of money that they can use to address those, it's a total of $267 million between the January and May proposals, sorry.
Ms. Hyman.
And the Assembly adopted the governor's proposal. This amounts to about a 4.6% apportionment increase above the 3% enrollment growth and the 1% COLA. The Senate augmented this proposal by $6.3 million. And as Ms. Bosler mentioned, these funds are unrestricted and districts can use them for various purposes, including retirement costs, maintenance, professional development, and the like.
Do you know how our subcommittee landed on 6.3?
I believe it was a balancer.
Okay, very good. Page 22, deferred maintenance.
Given the amount of one-time monies, there were a few different priorities that the administration took in the budget, but certainly deferred maintenance is one of those issues that we've heard a lot about from the community colleges and from, frankly, most areas of government. There are a lot of deferred maintenance issues, and so this is a very good use of one-time money, and our proposal included $100 million.
And the Assembly adopted the governor's proposal. The Senate augmented it by $25 million. All three proposals reduce an estimated $1 billion deferred maintenance backlog, potentially preventing costly repairs and maintenance in the future. These funds also can be used for instructional equipment, and they are allocated to districts based on FTES.
The need to address our deferred maintenance really struck home in my district this past year when we had a science building that could no longer operate, and students got derailed from their time frame of obtaining their degree. A large building was no longer usable, and it becomes very real very fast. Page 23, categorical actions.
This is an area where over the last 2 years we've taken a bit of a different approach to the traditional categoricals at the community colleges. Last year we put a significant amount of money in a student success categorical as well as a student equity plan categorical. And in those flexible student supports categoricals, those monies are used to help improve student success at the community colleges. We also have these other historic categoricals that have been around for a long time, including the Disabled Student Program and Services, as well as the Extended Opportunity Programs and Services, and also Child Care Tax Bailout. And these programs continue to exist side by side with our new, more flexible categorical that can certainly fund all of the programs and services that are delivered in these other more narrow categoricals. Our budget does allocate a COLA to those more historic, older categoricals in the budget.
Thank you. And Ms. Hyman?
And the Senate adopted the governor's proposed COLAs and provided another $2.4 million to provide COLAs for 15 additional categorical programs that also have been subject to cost increases. And the Senate also augmented one program, Academic Senate, by $200,000. The Assembly adopted the governor's proposal and provided another $16.1 million for augmentations for 4 categorical programs: Financial Aid Administration, Campus Child Care Services, the Fund for Student Success, and the Academic Senate, a slightly higher augmentation than the Senate on that one.
And then just to note, there are a number of items that are not in conference, given that the Assembly and Senate took similar actions with regard to augmentations to EOPS, 33.6 million, 9 million for CalWorks student services, and 3.6 million for part-time faculty office hours. So we won't see those in conference. Senator Lara.
Thank you. I just want to commend the administration for recognizing EOPS as a critical program for first-generation students and low-income students. I also just want to take a second to give recognition to the MESA and Puente programs that are getting a COLA. I mean, when we're talking about STEM education and diversifying our student pool, these programs are essential for these students. And I know that some folks might find them limiting, but I can tell you, maybe 90% of the legislators of color in this building who serve are products of these programs. So I just want to thank the administration for that.
I'm going to assume everyone agrees with you on that. I know your constituents do. On page 24, Foster Youth Education Opportunity Program.
So last year, there was a bill that was signed by Senator Liu, SB 1023, and this is a program to really support foster youth at our community colleges. We provided, the governor's budget includes budget bill language to allow the student success and support the EOPS program at up to 10 community colleges to help implement this bill. So our budget bill language directs the Chancellor's office to work with those community colleges to make sure that the bill is implemented.
The Senate modified the governor's proposed budget language to clarify that these enhanced foster youth services should have priority for up to $15 million of the Student Equity Plan Fund augmentation. The Assembly, instead of using student equity funds, augmented the budget by $5 million to fund these projects.
Thank you. Ms. Bosler, your take on the budget bill language?
I mean, I think our general approach on all of these things has been that between the student success categorical money and the student equity plans, the administration and the legislature has put over about $500 million out to in the last 2 years out to the community college districts to provide a variety of support services programs. Some of those support services should absolutely be tailored to unique aspects and challenges that foster youth have, consistent with the bill. And so that is really the budget bill. Our budget bill language is really directing the Chancellor's office to work with the school sites to make sure that's in place. I think that in terms of the Senate's language that earmarks $15 million, it's not preferred because it really makes it more complex in how they administer. Our approach has been more of an outcomes-based approach with the student equity plans, and there's clearly a role, and it's made even more clear now by Senator Liu's bill that was signed and chaptered this last fall about what the expectation is for community college districts related to foster youth.
Ms. Hyman, do you have a take on the budget bill language?
We recommend Senate on this that uses existing student equity plan funds. The bill analysis last year actually estimated the cost at about $1.7 million. The language allows for up to $15 million for priority. Both houses have approved, as you mentioned, $34 million augmentation for extended opportunity programs and services that also could be used for this purpose. As Ms. Bosler mentioned, there have been hundreds of millions of dollars of augmentations and other student support services that also could be used for this purpose.
And I'm sorry, I was probably confusing the situation. We're fine with the Senate language.
You are okay with it?
Yeah,
Okay, good to know.
It's fine.
And again, we're holding all of these open as they'll be conforming to the larger 98 package. Page 25 is Cal Grant B access.
And this is a legislative proposal. The Assembly proposed $39 million to supplement financial aid for Cal Grant B recipients at the community colleges who are taking at least 12 units per term, so considered full-time. The proposal would provide about $450 per student for any cost of attendance. The Senate and Governor had no proposal. a few issues for your consideration on this, which you may want to consider along with other financial aid proposals that you get to later in the agenda. The Assembly also has proposed an increase of about $350 in the Cal Grant B Access Award for all recipients, not only community college students. That's in the Student Aid Commission agenda. Increased aid would certainly improve affordability for Cal Grant B recipients. We don't expect it would necessarily improve access because the size of these increases is probably not going to make the difference between students' ability to attend or not, but it would help with their costs. The proposal would incentivize full-time enrollment, which is associated with higher student success rates. And community college students do typically receive the least comprehensive financial aid packages because the community colleges don't have institutional aid for costs other than enrollment fees. On the other hand, this proposal would further fragment the state's financial aid system, providing different rules and benefits for students depending on which segment they're attending.
And are your estimates the same as what I have here, about $450 for about 85,000 students?
That's what we understand, yeah.
You know, one of the things we discovered as a part of our process at one point in looking at the funding of the institutions, and while it appears on the surface that community college is a cheaper experience and so forth and so on, it turns out to be a more expensive experience because, one, you get less financial aid, and oftentimes community colleges don't have dorms, we don't pay for housing, those kinds of things. And so when we add up the expenses pretty much are pretty high in terms of community college. And so in a report we had showed that the community college is a good deal if you're living at home and you're still on your parents and so forth and so on. But many of our community college students are independent livers. And as a result, they have higher cost of living because they don't, and they get only money, a little bit of grant money for their tuition, for their, not much for their books. And so we've tried this year to try to augment our community college population a little bit more, mainly because it looks like on the surface that it is a better deal, and it's a good deal. But when you add in the other costs that are not covered in a person who goes to the university, who not only gets the tuition, but the additional grants to deal with housing and food and so forth and so on, you don't get that at community college. So then that cost becomes your cost. And so we discovered that it is significantly higher for students to go to community college than to go to CSU and UC. It's interesting.
Especially so for those attending community college in San Francisco.
Cost of living in San Diego and everywhere else, you know, just where it's expensive.
Yep.
You know, but we often promote the idea that it's a better deal because of the cost of tuition, and yet we don't take in consideration the other supports that community college students don't get, and at the same time the expenses that they have for living that are not covered in the various grants. So,
Senator Nielsen.
Is it contemplated that finance and analysts that the student would be taking a full load, meaning 15 units?
12, 15.
This proposal requires that students be enrolled in at least 12 units,
12.
which for federal financial aid purposes is considered full-time enrollment.
And Ms. Hyman, do you have an opinion on this proposal?
Just those considerations to share with you.
Mm-hmm.
Page 26 is full-time faculty.
Our May revision proposal included a $75 million item to increase the number of full-time faculty. This is something that hadn't been done in many years, but we do think that the investment in full-time faculty is an important priority for the community college system. Ours was based on a $70,000 average number that we think is very important because this is really an average cost to convert a part-time faculty to a full-time. And we do not support the added language in the Senate's version to increase the faculty obligation number, which will just further restrict and bind community colleges and their ability to manage their budgets over the long term. So we do continue to support our proposal and are not supportive of some of the modifications made in the Senate proposal.
Very good. Ms. Hyman?
just to explain the Senate proposal, the Assembly adopted the governor's proposal. The Senate modified the language. Under the governor's proposal, districts at the lower end, they're divided into quintiles. Districts are divided into quintiles based on what percent of their faculty are full-time faculty. So districts with relatively low ratio of full-time faculty would have to use most of the money to increase their faculty number. So the funding that a district receives, if it's at the low end, divided by that 70,000 average cost figure, that would be the number of additional faculty that would get added to the district's number. For districts at the higher end of the faculty ratio, they would be able to keep more of the funding to use for any purposes. So instead of one additional faculty for every $70,000, they would only have to add one additional faculty for every $190,000 that they receive, leaving much more available for other uses in the district. The Senate proposal is to shrink those numbers, the 70, and under the governor's proposal, those go up by 30,000 increments for each of the 5 quintiles. The Senate proposal would shrink that to choose a number less than 70 that reflects the costs of a new faculty member, not an average faculty member. And then each of the other quintiles would also be a lower number. That would drive hiring of more full-time faculty. However, it turns out that the conversion cost from part-time to full-time varies widely across districts. And at some districts, indeed, it is a lower cost, lower than 70, but in some districts it's higher. So choosing a lower number could be a hardship for some districts that actually have a higher conversion cost. And I think that's finance's sensitivity about that. Another approach that has been suggested to drive higher faculty hiring would be to shrink that increment between the different quintiles. So instead of ranging all the way from one for every 70,000 to one for every 190,000, going in $30,000 increments, perhaps shrink that to $15,000 or $20,000 increments between the quintiles. But it turns out the formula is fairly complicated to implement. So there are a number of discussions going on, and we would be happy to continue working with your staff and others to refine these proposals.
Have we always had uniformity in these salaries, notwithstanding the great disparity of cost of living throughout the state?
The salaries are bargained locally.
Right.
There's not uniformity.
And we have in statute a goal of 75%?
It's not really a statutory goal. In statute, you have recognized the Board of Governors' target of 75%, kind of temporarily. The statute says until the plan is refined, you recognize their goal of 75%. It is Board of Governors policy, and it is in the community college regulations. There's a formula that requires community colleges to increase their full-time faculty number proportionally to increases in credit enrollment funding.
Do we know how many, if any, districts are at 75% or above?
Just a handful of districts are in the range of 75%.
And how does the formula impact those districts?
Those districts would not have to hire any new faculty, typically, because, and this is where the formula gets a little complicated, there's a minimum full-time faculty number that's been assigned to each district as part of the regulatory structure. The districts that are in the 75% range, their minimum number is below that. So they've hired more than they're required to by that minimum number. And because they have that space between the minimum number and how many they've actually hired, this formula would increase their minimum requirement, but they would still be above it. So they would still be meeting that minimum requirement and would not have to hire any additional full-time faculty.
Okay. And is there some debate as to whether a district is at 75% or not? Is it hard to make that determination? Are there variables that make it less than decisive?
The Chancellor's Office does put out a calculation based on some standardized information.
And that's the last word on it.
I believe that is the last word,
Okay,
yes.
good. Senator Lara.
Thank you. On this issue, definitely supporting the administration and look forward to working out some of the details in the distribution formula. But as we look at the student body of the state, we know that half of those students are Latino, coupled with API and African American. You see over 70% of the student body, yet the full-time faculty remains very, not as diverse as the student body. And so as we talk about full-time faculty, we know that our part-time lecturers is where you see the majority of people of color that are teaching. And again, just want to put a note out there that when we talk about faculty ratio, full-time faculty ratios, which is a great idea to increase, that we look at also at the diversity and ensuring that it mirrors the student population of California.
Thank you, Senator. Apropos, page 27, professional development. We have an assembly proposal, Ms. Hyman.
Yes, the Assembly proposed $16 million in one-time funds for faculty professional development. The Senate and Governor had no proposal.
16 million one time.
16 million one time, and this would effectively restore a categorical program that previously existed, but it would be just one-time funding.
Okay. Ms. Boswell.
Two of our unrestricted pots of money, the $267 million that we talked about earlier for increased operating expenses, as well as the $626 million in backlog of mandate payments, we think are both good categories that could be put towards professional development at the local level.
In addition, Mr. Chair, I would add that both houses approved the governor's proposal to provide $15 million for the Institutional Effectiveness Initiative, which includes substantial professional development. And both houses also approved augmentations for the Academic Senate, which also provides professional development.
Thank you. Moving on to adult inmate education on page 28. Ms. Bosler.
Yes, in our May revision, we added some intent language for the Chancellor's Office to identify districts that would be willing to use up to $5 million for the purpose of receiving matching private funds to build and develop better adult inmate programming that includes community college courses being delivered within the prisons, as well as correspondence courses.
And by way of a little more background, 10 private foundations, with Ford Foundation as the lead, are interested in supporting this pilot project to improve inmate education in California. And these foundations are willing to put up $15 million and are looking for a 1-to-3 match. They're looking for a $5 million match for the funding. The governor asked the Chancellor to identify districts willing to put up some of their funds for this purpose. The Assembly actually funded $5 million in one-time funds, and the Assembly provided $15 million in one-time funds.
Senate 15, Assembly 5?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Senator Nielsen.
I'd like to have finance and analysts build some accountability into this. In other words, tracking the success. We've spent billions in rehabilitation at the Department of Corrections, and we don't know whether it's working or not. And we're starting to spend quite a bit in realignment, and we don't know whether it's working or not. We don't have data in terms of rehabilitation of specific individuals. Can we build some accountability into these dollars that for the adult ed here, the reading?
My understanding about the pilot project that the foundations are interested in funding is that it contains a substantial evaluation component. The project itself is based on a study that was conducted with Stanford and UC Berkeley that documented positive results, reduced recidivism, and other improvements from educational innovations. This project would be looking to do a proof of concept, so they would be very focused on evaluation and accountability, with the intent that what outcomes they're able to show from these approaches could then be taken up more broadly by community colleges and other education providers.
No, to the chair, I would like that we prepare language that indicates that's a desire of the legislature too, not just the assurance that they will at the university, where they may or may not. But if that's our expectation, it's a different matter.
That's a good point, Senator Nielsen. And could you provide for the committee some
Yes.
of the information that came from Stanford? I think you'll be very impressed by it. It's really amazing what they have accomplished. I'm told a few other states have already taken advantage of this Ford Foundation Challenge.
Yes, I believe North Carolina, New Jersey, and Michigan are participating.
Good. Assemblyman Blue.
Just wanted to be sure I understand the numbers correctly here between the Senate version and the Assembly version. Because of the 3-to-1 match, am I correct that under the Assembly version, the total amount would be 20 million? Under the Senate version, it would be 30 million? Because you get the 5 plus 15, and then the
Right.
Senate's doing 10 million additional.
The 15 from the foundations is capped.
Okay,